see you out again tonight. Welcome to the third evening of the 9th annual Cap Times Idea Fest. I'm Paul Fadlin, publisher of the Capital Times, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you for being here tonight. I've told people over the last couple of nights, it means the world to us to get the kind of attendance, record attendance we have this year. And how it supports the locally owned and managed Capital Times. If you're not already a member, many of you are, I know, please consider becoming one. In times to come, we plan to do some members-only events, and so that's another reason to consider joining us. That'll be outside the scope of the Idea Fest week. I want to direct your attention briefly to the listed sponsors on the boards behind me. They, together, plus your support, make this fabulous event possible. So thank you. Our programs this week have felt remarkably timely, given what's going on in the country, and this one is no exception. Journalist and author Garrett Graff is the former editor of both Politico and Washingtonian magazines. He's also an instructor at Georgetown University. He writes an online newsletter titled Doomsday Scenario. David Maraniss, tonight's moderator, describes it as perhaps the most pungent analysis of the current political landscape out there. Garrett describes his newsletter as a mix of national security, politics, and history that attempts to answer the question, are things really as bad as they seem? He attracted much notice recently with a post suggesting how the country may have just recently tipped into authoritarianism in the last few weeks. He wrote in part, "It's clear today America is different, and even if we fight our way back, it will never be the same again." Garrett's newest book was released last month to great acclaim. It's titled The Devil Reached for the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb. His books are for sale. That book in particular is for sale back in the lobby, and he'll be available after to autograph copies. I'm looking forward to reading it. I've read reviews, and they're terrific. In it, he draws on the voices of some 500 people who either witnessed or participated in the Manhattan Project or the later bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Garrett is clearly among America's most important next generation of political thinkers. We are thrilled that David Maraniss invited him to Madison tonight and that he accepted. Please give a warm Madison welcome to Garrett Graff and David Maraniss. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So Garrett was kind of the boy wonder of Washington, who bailed for his home state of Vermont, something I can relate to. He claims that Vermont cheese is superior, but but he could run, but you can run, but you can't hide, right? You go to Vermont, but what do? You write a blog about Washington, sort of, and it's one that I read avidly, even when it raises my blood pressure to a dangerous degree. But I've thought of Garrett in another sense. My favorite political writer of all time was George Orwell. And the reason was that not only was he rational and confident and able to relate his own sensibility in a way that transcended ideology, but it was so clear. And he could write, as he would put it, about what is in front of your nose, but you don't see until he writes it. And I think of Garrett that way as sort of a young Orwell, which is the most I could say about someone. So, or at least a budding Orwell. But Doomsday Scenario, man. Welcome to Madison, Dr. Doom. And I just you just said backstage about that title and what it was you thought it might convey and what it came to convey. What was it? What were you originally thinking of Doomsday Scenario?
Well, thank you, David, for having me in those overly generous introductory words there. It's a pleasure to be here in Madison. One of the really fun things about being on a book tour is the chance to get out and see a lot of thriving independent bookstores around the country. And it's fun here in Madison to see a thriving local media organization from the standpoint that there are not very many of them that are as central to a community's fabric as Cap Times is here for Madison. So my newsletter was supposed to be more fun than it has turned out to be. I wrote a book in 2017 that was called Raven Rock. That is, the subtitle of the book is The Story of the U.S. Government's Plan to Save Itself While the Rest of Us Die. And it was the history of the U.S. government's continuity of government operations, all of the sort of weird things that would happen during and after nuclear war, during the Cold War, sort of all of the history of presidential succession and all of those weird subjects. You probably, some of you in the audience remember the, Bert the Turtle and the duck and cover drills of the elementary school in the 50s and 60s. And so the newsletter originally grew out of that and sort of this idea that a lot of what I write about is, sort of doomsday scenario planning and thinking about some of the worst things in the world that could happen. But it was originally launched several years ago with a much more tongue-in-cheek idea that the answer was supposed to be that things are not as bad as they seem.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get to the real doomsday as opposed to the doomsday we're facing now, but let's talk about that one first. I was really struck by something you wrote recently about ICE. We've all seen sort of on video clips the brutality of ICE, which is horrible. But what Garrett was able to document was the totality of ICE and how it truly has become a paramilitary or military organization, the brown shirts of the Trump administration. Can you talk about what you saw, where they're taking people, and what it's developed into?
Sure. So I've spent a lot of my journalism career actually writing about federal law enforcement. And I've written I've written actually a couple of books on the FBI. I spent several years at Politico covering the wave of criminality and corruption in Customs and Border Protection and the Border Patrol that overtook that agency in the wake of its own post 9/11 hiring surge. In something that will sound semi-familiar to anyone who is following what is going on with ICE right now, after 9/11, in the sort of late Bush years, the Border Patrol tried to double and triple in size in a very short period of time. And the answer is that there is no healthy way for a law enforcement agency to grow that quickly at that scale. And what ended up happening was the Border Patrol cut its training standards, it cut its hiring standards, it pushed agents out into the field before they had been fully trained. And one of the ways that hiring surges break organizations is what it also means is that people are pushed up into supervisory and executive ranks before they are ready and before they are experienced. And so what that meant at the Border Patrol and CBP, which is the parent agency that makes up both the blue uniformed Office of Field Operations that make up the people that you see at official ports of entry, as well as the green uniforms of the Border Patrol, that from over a 7-year period at the end of Bush through the early years of Obama, there were 2,170 Border Patrol agents and CBP officers arrested themselves for misconduct, crime, and corruption. And what that meant is that for that 7-year period,
During the period that they were working or before?
During the period that they were working, that during that period, there was one, I forget the exact years, but it was sort of roughly 2008 to 2015. During that period, there was one CBP officer or Border Patrol agent arrested every single day for 7 years. And one would think that that was a lesson that DHS would have learned. And we are now actually trying to speed run that hiring surge in all of the same ways with ICE today as they race to add 10,000 new officers that were funded as part of the Republican spending bill this summer. That will sort of turbocharge immigration enforcement in the United States. And ICE is already repeating all of the same set of mistakes that the Border Patrol made in the Bush and Obama years, including that they have already cut their training length, which was already among the shortest of all federal law enforcement agencies. And they are now setting up a training regimen that is just 47 days long to become an ICE officer, as compared to the 5 or 6 months, for instance, that it takes to become an FBI special agent. 47, of course, chosen not because it has a particular
Yes.
educational level that it obtains, but because it is, of course, the number of the president that Donald Trump is. And you are setting an agency up to fail when you are setting its training standards as part of some cult of personality.
Well, one can only imagine how many Proud Boys are going to get into this organization. But along with that, they're depleting other agencies to fill the void, right? And can you talk about where they're taking people from and how that's weakening so many other places?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was writing about this week was the extent to which everything is becoming ICE. And, we have this weird melange of federal law enforcement agencies, but they each have their own distinct roles and responsibilities. DEA, ATF, Secret Service, FBI, U.S. Marshals, Diplomatic Security Service, IRS criminal investigators. And basically all of these agencies are now being seconded to ICE to work immigration enforcement. And that right now in the United States, it's roughly 1 out of 5 FBI agents is now working immigration enforcement, which means that we have actually reassigned more FBI agents to immigration enforcement than we reassigned to counterterrorism cases after 9/11. Half of all DEA agents are now working immigration enforcement, and 2/3 of all ATF agents are now actually working ICE immigration enforcement, including as well, agents from diplomatic security services, IRS criminal investigations. And so I think one way to sort of look at what ICE is doing to us right now is that the federal government has made a very specific decision that it is going to stop investigating almost all federal crime in order to prioritize immigration enforcement. And so, think of the cases that we are not working right now on counterintelligence, on cybercrime, on espionage, on counterterrorism, on domestic terrorism, on white-collar crime, human smuggling, human trafficking, drug smuggling, drug cartels. Just a huge, this is an amazing, amazing time to be a criminal in the United States.
Well, yeah, in the White House. Do you think that this will just, the 10,000 that they want to bring in, will they keep the other people too and just make it a sort of the police force of the United States?
It's sort of hard to tell because I think one thing that we have seen is that they are effectively pausing all other federal law enforcement hiring through the end of the calendar year in order to do this ICE hiring surge. And I think that that has some big downstream implications in terms of people who are not going to be coming into some of these agencies and offices. But across the federal government right now, there are 33,000 people who do not work at ICE who have been reassigned to work for ICE and support their immigration enforcement. And if you add in state and local police officers who work on federal task forces like a violent crimes task force or a joint terrorism task force who have been reassigned, that's another 8,000, which gets you to around 42,000 people all told who did not work for ICE on immigration enforcement 3 months ago, who now are.
And then you have the actual military. A couple of months ago, I was in Austin, Texas at the LBJ school on a panel with Admiral McRaven, who was literally shaking, talking about what's happening to the military and its politicization under Hegseth and Trump and the way that they're using the military as a political force in this country. What do you see there, and can that be turned around, or is this a generational change in the military that's going to be very difficult to deal with?
So I think this is a problem both on the military side and on the federal law enforcement side, which is, part of, I think, Donald Trump's evil superpowers is the way that he makes those of us who believe in institutions defend institutions that deserve actual reform and criticism. And so what I'm about to say is not an endorsement of all of the behavior of all federal law enforcement across all of American history. But we all, as American citizens, have a really vested interest in the moral legitimacy of federal law enforcement. Much of our daily life is secured by the idea that most Americans and most businesses in America are inclined to cooperate when the FBI shows up and says, hey, we've got a problem, we need your help. Most of us are inclined to be helpful to federal law enforcement when we can be. And what I think we are watching right now is the administration torching the moral legitimacy and sort of goodwill that federal law enforcement has built up across America over decades. And again, not in every community, these are not perfect records. I'm the first to, criticize the FBI on various fronts. The idea that you have these communities, and we're watching this in Chicago, we're watching this in DC, we're watching this in communities all across the country, where you have people in the streets driving away federal law enforcement operations or jeering National Guards troops as they patrol in Washington, D.C. like that's not good for our country long term. And the National Guard in particular is a unit where it is not designed to be a domestic police force, and that is not why people join the National Guard. And the extent to which it is being used as some sort of augmentation of domestic police forces is incredibly corrosive to the sort of fabric of a democratic and open society.
Many in the audience were here last night and heard Stacey Abrams, who was incredible, sort of articulating a 10-point road to autocracy. And Jen Rubin and Norm Eisen were also filling in a lot of that. You've written quite a bit about that. And in your mind, it's not that we're on the road, we're there. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think that there's a mistaken sense for a lot of people that there will be some bright line where sort of everything before this is democracy and everything after it is authoritarianism. And what I think we saw unfold in America over the month of August was our country tipping into something new. And what I mean by that is it is a country, over the month of August, we saw the military occupation of our nation's capital. We saw the rise of these, ICE tactics of masked, anonymous agents of the state, leaping out of unmarked vehicles and kidnapping people based on the color of their skin, which is now legal according to the Supreme Court. And we've seen sort of all of these weird moments. President Trump taking a stake in Intel for the U.S. government. Levying a presumably unconstitutional export tax on NVIDIA so it can export its AI chips. We saw Tim Cook from Apple show up in the Oval Office and literally hand the president gold on camera in order to curry personal favor so that his company could continue operating. We saw the president over the month of August begin to interfere in our nation's history with the Smithsonian, in our culture. This is a president who believes that he personally should get to choose what plays get performed on which stages. We saw him, and this is sort of the type of thing that goes by very quickly, and yet I think actually are moments worth mentioning. He, on sort of a random Sunday afternoon, tweeted out how he decreed that Major League Baseball needed to induct Roger Clemens into the Hall of Fame immediately. And that sort of all of this is filtered through this sense that his is the one true taste, that sort of all of American culture and history, the books that we read, the plays that we watch, the sports that we watch, should be reflections of what he thinks is good. And that, to me, is the picture of authoritarianism. And so what I tried to document was that sort of America today feels different, and today is different than before. And that doesn't mean that we are a fully authoritarian state. That doesn't mean that some of this is not reversible. But it does mean, to me, that America has crossed a fundamental line that we have never crossed before as a nation. And that regardless of the stories that we tell ourselves about our country and about ourselves as a people, we have crossed a line that we never thought could be crossed here in the United States.
Well,
and David, let me sort of say one more thing. So I just finished this book that in the introduction that was about the making of the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. And the most chilling chapter so it's an oral history, it's all in the first person of the voices of the people who participated and lived it. And the chapter that was most chilling for me to work on I was working on it in January and February, and it was the chapter about the mostly Jewish refugee scientists who fled the enveloping cloak of Hitler's fascism to come to the United States across the 1930s and 1940, 1941. And it was their memories and stories of what it was like to watch fascism take over their country. And the way that will sort of forever puzzle, I think, historians and puzzled them at the time, the extent to which Germany didn't put up a fight as it lost its democracy. And you had all of these powerful people in Germany saying, and this I'm sure doesn't sound familiar at all, don't worry, we can control him. Once he gets into power, he's not going to be as bad as he says he's going to be, and we'll have good people around him who will control him. And they talked about their neighbors, who the physicist talks about how he was stopped by one of his neighbors on the street who had joined the Nazi party. And he knew that this physicist was Jewish, and the sort of rising anti-Semitism was driving a lot of these physicists away. And his neighbor stopped him to sort of say, don't worry, I don't really believe all this stuff, but it was just going to be better for my career if I joined the Nazi party rather than sort of stood up against it. And it's reading these quotes, it just feels incredibly chilling watching what we are living through right now.
I just happened to read a piece about the US Open and Trump's going there, and the writer was watching this woman cheer loudly for Donald Trump, and then she explained that she's afraid she'd get deported if she didn't support him. So, I think that so many of us, or I should speak for myself, but I'm sure there are millions of people like me who over the last few years have felt like they were naive their whole lives, that they didn't think this could happen. Did you?
So I told this story actually in a column when I was writing about this sort of enveloping cloak of fascism here in the United States, where for me there was one very specific moment. I was in Washington in the 2008 financial crisis, and I was at one of those backgrounder luncheons that reporters have with newsmakers. You probably went to approximately 5,000 of them.
I avoided them.
In your own career. And we were up on the Hill with Eric Cantor, who I think was deputy whip maybe at the time, but sort of rising star in the Republican Party at the time. And the House was considering whether to vote for that first big bailout. And this was the moment, you probably remember, John McCain had suspended his campaign. Sort of everyone was sort of focused on getting this bill through that was, President Bush said was critical to the support of the economy. Hank Paulson, the Secretary of the Treasurer, Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Fed, John McCain, the Republican presidential nominee. Everyone said that this was necessary to save the American economy. And we were sitting in this luncheon, and Eric Cantor said, we're going to vote it down. And we were all incredulous, because we were like, everyone in your party, like your party is in control, and your party says that this is critical, like, how are you going to do this? And he was just like, no, we're going to vote it down, like, no bailouts for Wall Street. And that's what they did. As you remember, there was the day they voted down that first bailout. The stock market dropped 800 points. It was this incredibly dark moment in that fall of 2008. And I walked out of that luncheon feeling like I remember it so vividly, that I had glimpsed this sort of level of nihilism in the sort of beating heart of what was coming to be the center of the Republican Party that really worried me. Because it was this moment where I was like, if you're not willing to do the thing that's good for the country, that sort of everyone agrees is good for the country, like, that's a level of politics that until, you can argue about other examples, et cetera, but that to me was sort of the first moment that I feel like I really saw that. And that I sort of long believed, probably longer than I should have, that there was going to be some red line that the Republican Party leadership would not trade for greed and power. And some principle somewhere that they actually believed in at their core. And I think we have now gotten to the point where we can sort of safely say that there is no principle that lies at the heart of the modern Republican Party that they will not trade for greed and power.
Garrett, you weren't even born for Watergate, were you?
No.
No. And yet you're a student of it and looked at it with fresh eyes long after the fact. I'm curious about, I've read a lot of what you've written about it, but I'd like you to talk about sort of your perspective on it from history's perspective and from today, and Nixon and Trump.
Yeah. So I wrote a history of Watergate that came out in 2021, I think, 2022. And it was inspired by my years of covering the first Trump administration. And I was interested in what happened the last time our US system confronted a corrupt and criminal president in office. And Watergate we sort of shorthand as this burglary on June 17th, 1972 at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. But I think Watergate is best thought of as a mindset and not an event. And it's this sort of paranoid, conspiratorial worldview that Richard Nixon brings into the White House that then serves as an umbrella for about 13 different and distinct scandals, of which the burglary is really only one of them. And what you saw, to me, Watergate is actually this incredibly inspiring moment in American politics, because you see the delicate ballet of checks and balances written into the Constitution that all come together to force this president from office. And sort of every single part of the Washington structure has to work together and do its own part. And the press, the Justice Department, the FBI, the House, the Senate, the District Court, the Appeals Court, the Supreme Court, sort of Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, the Bill of Rights, sort of it's all written into the fabric of Watergate. And when you think about the difference between then and now, one of the things that really stands out to me is the extent to which the Republican members of Congress in Watergate understood that their constitutional oath required them to act as co-equal members of the legislative branch to hold the executive branch's abuses to account, and that their first duty was as members of Congress, and that only second were they Republican. And that Republicans actually play an incredibly important part in Watergate, from
As
Howard
they
Baker.
did in the McCarthy era.
From Howard Baker to Lowell Weicker to others. And what they understood was that Congress needed to protect its own prerogatives, and that sort of they had their own role in the House and the Senate to play in ensuring that the presidency and the executive branch did not get sort of out of control, didn't get too much power. And to me, that's the single biggest difference that we have seen between then and now. And it's sort of one of the things that I think the founders didn't ever possibly appreciate, was the idea that members of Congress would stand around and say, well, all those laws that we passed, it's totally fine if the president ignores them. If he can do what he wants, he's the president.
One of the themes that I've written about and thought a lot about over the course of my career is whether human nature can change or whether the culture changes around it. So that leads to the question, are these Republicans from that era, were they better people? Were they wiser, or was it the culture that was the difference?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think some of it is you have to, and you've written a great book about this moment as well, and the collapse of faith in American institutions that occurred against the backdrop of Nixon and the Pentagon Papers in Vietnam. But there was really a belief in institutions in that era that we have lost. One of the sort of most remarkable aspects of what comes out of Watergate is this idea that presidents will lie to the American people, which was literally unthinkable at the start of Nixon's presidency.
But all presidents had lied before that.
All presidents have lied, but that you see even Democrats in the midst of Watergate saying, well, Nixon says he's not involved, and he's the president. He wouldn't lie to us. We can't impeach him. He's the president. And that's the Democrats.
Moving to the future, before we get into the past again, there were some interesting discussions last night about 2026, both whether that's the most important thing or not, whether there are other ways of dealing with autocracy that are equally important to that election. But do you think there will be an election?
Oh, absolutely. This has never been a question to me. Okay. Every country in the world effectively has elections.
Yeah, that's what Stacey said.
Russia has regular elections. Saddam Hussein had a undefeated record in Iraqi elections. What I think my concern, and I think we're starting to see this in places like Texas, we're starting to see it in the deployment of the National Guard and ICE to American cities, is the efforts by the Republican Party to lock in an illegitimate minority rule by selecting who gets to vote in 2026. That in a closely divided country, you don't actually have to change that many districts, that many votes, in order to really change the electoral map. And think of a election next fall in 2028 where they look exactly like every other election that we are used to in America, except just totally coincidentally, the National Guard is deployed to 10 major U.S. cities with minority-heavy voting populations. And those 10,000 new ICE officers just happened to set up a whole bunch of ID checkpoints, not at the polling places, but just sort of in the neighborhood of the polling places. Like, you don't have to have that many people stay home before you've really changed the electoral map.
Just a few 100,000 can do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a million or thousands of little things that are happening like that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And it's all part of, Donald Trump's push to end mail-in voting. That matters in the scenario where you have to go through an ICE checkpoint in order to vote next year. Like these are not I think part of the challenge of Donald Trump is there's so much that happens on any given day that it's easy to not think that all of these dots end up connected in some way, but they all point in the same direction.
On a happier subject about nuclear war,
Yes, yes, bring it on.
since you're on a book tour for The Devil Reached to the Sky, what prompted you to tackle that one?
So this is my third book-length volume of oral history. And I started with a book in 2019 that was an oral history of 9/11. It's a book called The Only Plane in the Sky. Tomorrow, of course, the 24th anniversary. The book came out for the in 2019 for the 18th anniversary, which to me was this really important moment where you began to see the first generation of Americans born after 9/11 coming into adulthood in a world shaped by 9/11, but who were too young to remember it. And the 9/11 that they know is the one that they read in history books. And the history that we tell of 9/11 goes like this. The attacks begin at 8:46 in the morning. The whole thing is over 102 minutes later at 10:28 with the collapse of the second tower. There are 4 planes, 4 attack sites, and 3,000 people die. And that is entirely factually true. But if any of you remember 9/11, that's not the day that you remember experiencing. We didn't know when the attacks began. We didn't know when the attacks were over. For most of the day, we didn't know how many hijacked planes there had been. Remember, as late as 1 o'clock Eastern time, the US government believed there were still a dozen hijacked airliners in the skies over North America. We also didn't think that these were attacks that were in any way confined only to New York, Washington, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Skyscrapers were evacuated across the country. Disneyland closed. It was only the second time in history Disney had ever actually closed. The Toronto subway was evacuated. I mean, there was a real sense throughout that day of fear, chaos, confusion, and trauma. And so if you only read about 9/11 in history books, you don't get that fear, chaos, confusion, and trauma. And if you don't understand the fear, the chaos, the confusion, and the trauma, you don't understand why America reacted in the way that we did. And to me, there's a power that uniquely comes in oral history that lets you experience these moments in the eyes of the people who lived them at moments where they didn't know the outcome. That I think I've written narrative history, you are a master of narrative history, but so much of the way that we tell history makes events seem neater, cleaner, simpler, and more preordained than they felt to anyone who lived them at the time. Look at this moment that we are living through right now. None of us know how this story ends. We don't know right now whether we're in the beginning, the middle, or the end of the story. And so from that 9/11 book, I wanted to go back to World War II, because World War II is at the opposite end of that arc of history right now. You know, we've been experiencing these 80th anniversaries of the end of the war, including leading up to the last Tuesday and the 80th anniversary of the surrender ceremonies in Tokyo Bay. And I think they feel so poignant because we're also marking the unofficial passing of the greatest generation who fought and won those wars. And so from a historian's perspective, I was attracted to it because we have at this moment every first-person memory we are ever going to have of World War II. And to try to tell these stories, I started with a book on D-Day last year, and then this one on the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb, where to try to tell these stories through the eyes of the people who lived them before they knew how the stories would turn out. That sort of, what was it like to go to work on the Manhattan Project when you didn't know who was going to win World War II? The motivating factor for the start of the Manhattan Project is the idea that Adolf Hitler is building a bomb too. And you can't understand the Manhattan Project unless you understand how the pressure that those scientists felt that they were under from 1940 to 1944 was the idea that Adolf Hitler and Werner Heisenberg were at work at the same time on a bomb. And they didn't know whether Hitler was going to get the bomb first. They didn't know who was going to win. They didn't know whether the atom bomb would work at all. And trying, I think, to sort of understand that history and what it was like to experience those moments in the eyes and the voices and the footsteps of the people who lived them, I think is incredibly important, both to understanding the past, but because it also, I think, helps us look at our current moment with fresh eyes, which is none of us know how this story turns out. And I think one of the things that telling these stories through oral history has helped me better recognize is that I think we over-index in our own sense of the future, that the future is going to look more like the past than it has to. And that we sort of, I think, wrongly, and I think this is one of the things that the press corps gets really wrong about this moment right now, is the idea that America's future will sort of be within a standard deviation or two of what America's past has been. And there is no guarantee of that. And that, to me, there's a real power that comes in going back and looking at these voices that helps better shape how we have to consider what our own future is going to be.
We'll get to the press very soon. I would just want to ask one more question about oral history. I imagine that what you do with oral history and what I do to write a narrative history, we do the same sort of research. But what did you go through to compile this oral history of the bomb?
So I do, I'm a Vermonter, home of the world's best Cabot cheese. One of the things that I sort of always talk about in oral history is like making maple syrup. That it is a very slow, long boil. And it is the opposite of normal writing because it's all subtractive, not additive. I spend months, building this huge file of sort of every possible quote of any possible subject that I want to cover in the book. This book is pulled from, it's about 500 voices from the Manhattan Project and all sides of the World War II, including the so-called Hibakusa, the bomb-affected people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it's pulled from about 100 memoirs, a half dozen large-scale oral history projects by places like Oak Ridge, Tennessee, And then, actually a lot of Nobel Prize lectures for this one. J. Robert Oppenheimer's 1,000-page transcript of his Atomic Energy Commission security hearing was a really useful primary source. And I sit down at the sort of start of the writing process, which is really a deleting process, with a document that is about 1.4 million words. And it's about 4,000 pages.
And the average long book is 200,000 words.
And then spend months just deleting and boiling away between 90 and 95% of that to get down to sort of the finished final golden syrup.
But I imagine, to use another metaphor, I mean, it must be a jigsaw puzzle too to figure out where to put everything, right?
Yeah, and that to me is sort of part of what is really fun about it is you get the ability to sort of, one of the things, again, oral history really shows is how all of us only understand things from our own personal perspective. And we're often actually very bad at transforming our perspective into sort of what it means to history. And this was something that actually really came to me when I was doing the 9/11 book. I got access to an incredible trove of oral histories that the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in New York had compiled over the years. And most of the characters in all of these books sort of come and go in a single chapter or even a single quote. And there are very few characters that you sort of follow through the whole arc of a story. For the 9/11 book, one of those people ended up being Richard Eichen. And Richard Eichen was one of the only survivors from above the 90th floor of the North Tower. And he's injured in the initial attack, makes his way all the way down the tower. It takes him a really long time. He's caught in the collapse. He ends up at a hospital in Lower Manhattan and then is sort of terrified of follow-on attacks. And so in a hospital gown, breaks himself out of the hospital, walks across the Brooklyn Bridge, and hitchhikes his way home on a pickup truck in Brooklyn. And there's this photo that someone took that sort of only linked up with him years later, where you see him walking across the Brooklyn Bridge carrying a Snapple, which was sort of his only possession that he had that day. And I actually got to meet Richard at the 9/11 Memorial after the book came out. And he said to me, I can't believe you included my story in the book. And I was like, Richard, I read 2,000 oral histories of people on 9/11. And yours was one of the 5, craziest, wildest stories. And he had just never made that leap from sort of what his personal experience represented across the sort of totality of human experience that day. And there was another one from that same book. I'm just thinking of these stories so much this year, at this time of year every year, where this other office worker in the World Trade Center, caught in the collapse, et cetera, makes it home to New Jersey and then is surprised because it's Tuesday night and it's the team photo night for his peewee team football team. And he calls someone else on the team and they say, well, obviously the team photo's canceled tonight. And he goes, why? And they're like, buddy, the nation was attacked and we're at war. And he just hadn't made that leap yet because he was like, I just had a really bad day at work. It hadn't sort of adjusted to him yet, that this was not something that just happened to him and sort of his office in Lower Manhattan. This was something that had happened to the whole country.
You're listening to WAUK Jackson, Milwaukee, WMDX Columbus, Madison, WCFW HD2 W228 EP Chippewa Falls, WFHR Wisconsin Rapids, WISS Oshkosh, WZBU New Holstein, WLAK Amory, WLCX La Crosse, WRCE Richland Center, and WBZH Hayward, a part of the Civic Media Radio Network.
One of the grandest operations in human history. I mean, this is the largest invasion in world history. There are 1 million Allied combatants on the move across the United Kingdom and the English Channel on June 6, 1944. For almost everyone on D-Day, their entire story takes place on like a stretch of sand about the size of this stage. You know, you talk to these paratroopers, or you listen to these paratroopers, and you know, some of them only ever see one hedge in Normandy for the entire day. Some of them spend the entire day alone. You know, there are these incredible stories of these paratroopers dropped into the Norman hedgerows who spend the entire day without seeing another single Allied soldier, and sort of wonder all day, like, did the landings ever happen? Or am I the like only person on this side of the English Channel?
That's true of every battle.
Yeah.
You know, the individual sees only what they know.
Yep.
The best book I ever read on that was actually the Charterhouse of Parma, where they describe the sort of individuals and what they see. We could talk all night. We only have a few more minutes, so let me ask you a couple of more personal questions. The first of which is, I grew up in a journalism family. The reason I'm here tonight is because of my father, and you did as well. I'm wondering what sort of, your father was the head of the AP in Vermont, and what was it like? Did you have ink in your blood, and what did your father impart to you?
Yeah, so I'm a third generation journalist.
So am I.
My grandfather, who I'm actually named after, was the drama critic for the New York Herald Tribune in the 30s and 40s, and started out covering cops in Pittsburgh in the 1930s. And then my father spent about 30 years as the head of the Associated Press office in Vermont. My mother is actually a magazine writer and author as well. And I just sort of always grew up interested in journalism, and continued to be, in part because it's just like, to me, if you're a nerd and if you're curious, like, there's just no better job. Like, you get to sort of wake up and think about things that you're interested in, and then call people and call the smartest possible people on whatever the subject is that you're interested in, and then they'll just talk to you, and they'll sort of explain whatever the thing is that you're interested in.
Great. One last question. I know that one of the reasons you left Washington, went back to Vermont, was thinking about running for office as a lieutenant governor. That didn't happen for various reasons, but the 10 years, I think that they said you had to be a resident for 10 years, and those 10 years are up.
Well, so I'm very happy on the journalism side, in part because I think this is a moment, and this comes back a little bit to where we, I think, started the conversation. This is a moment that requires real clarity. And I think one of the things, I am not a Bob Woodward journalist, talking about Watergate in terms of investigative journalism and, finding the one document that no one has ever found. But I think I have some talent in explanatory journalism and sort of explaining why things are the way that they are. And to me, that's sort of the fun of being able to move back and forth as I do between my writing of history and writing of journalism, in trying to use history to help better explain the story of today.
I'm glad that's your answer. And your explanatory abilities and your clarity is what make you great. So thank you so much, Garrett.
Thank you, David.
You're listening to Civic Media's coverage of Cap Times Idea Fest 2025. We'll be right back with Pat Kreitlow of Mornings of Pat Kreitlow with a recap of the other events of this convention.
Nightlight with Pete Schwaba.
Actor Neil McDonough. If you saw his face or if you Google him right now, you'll recognize him. He refuses to kiss another woman on camera. On the one hand, I applaud him for not kissing anyone other than his wife, but she says I don't have a problem with him if he wanted to kiss another woman. As someone who's done it, it doesn't really feel like cheating because there's people in the room. It's very mechanical.
You did write it yourself.
I did write it myself.
Nightlight with Pete Schwaba. Weeknights from 6 till 8 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the Civic Media app.
This is Robert Pilot, host of Native Roots Radio. On our show, we talk about Native issues like treaties, protecting Mother Earth, and holding our elected officials accountable. You'll also hear from Turtle Island voices like Arvina Martin, State Representative Heather Keeler, Ruth Anna Buffalo, Dr. Anthony Stately, State Senator Mary Kunish, Robert Lilligren, and Bob Blake. Native issues are human issues, and human issues are Native issues.
Native Roots Radio, weeknights at 8 on your local Civic Media radio station.
The Todd Albaugh Show.
At WFHR, Laura Berg, who is voice talent producer.
The thing about Central Wisconsin is what really matters is that your neighbors are okay and you're okay, no matter what your neighbor is. And if you reach out that hand and get to know them, the whole town's going to be better for it.
You got to take time to listen to people that might be a little different than you, but you can find commonalities if we just listen to one another.
The Todd Albaugh Show, weekdays 2 to 4 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app. The Maggie Dawn Show.
James Santel joining me. Donald Trump just flat out threatening Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook.
A lot of people apparently, Maggie, in high places in government engaging in mortgage fraud, including Adam Schiff and Letitia James, and now Commissioner Cook as well. The Federal Reserve was created independent of politics, preventing exactly this kind of thing from happening. This is the instability that causes economic crisis.
The award-winning Maggie Dawn Show, weekday afternoons from 4 until 6.
I'm Dan Schaefer. Let's recombobulate. This year's Wisconsin state budget included a rather unfortunate cut. The Republican-controlled Budget Committee eliminated funding for the Veterans Housing and Recovery Program that would have kept 2 facilities in Green Bay and Chippewa Falls open and operational. This state program aims to provide temporary housing, training, and supportive services to military veterans who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of becoming homeless in order to help them obtain permanent housing. In response to these looming closures, Democrats representing parts of Green Bay and Chippewa Falls introduced legislation in August to keep these facilities open. But Republican legislative leadership has not even allowed a public hearing on the bill, and the clock is ticking. Without these funds, these facilities are set to close by September 30th of this year. Republicans need to come to the table and step up to support our veterans now before it's too late.
Find all of Dan's work at the Recombobulation area.
I'm Rick Smith, host of The Rick Smith Show. If you're looking for honest talk, real stories, and straight-up news that matters to you, tune in to The Rick Smith Show. We're digging into the issues that affect your job, your family, your future. Join me weeknights at 9 on the Civic Media Radio Network, because your voice deserves to be heard. That's The Rick Smith Show, heard weeknights at 9 right here on the Civic Media Radio Network.
When it comes to vaping, the truth can get clouded. So let's make it clear. Vaping is not safe for youth.
Because vaping can put microscopic particles into your lungs.
And dangerous things like metals into your body.
And nicotine, which can harm a person's brain development through their mid-20s.
With appealing flavors, high nicotine levels, and lots of promotion on social media.
Many kids think vaping is harmless, but it's not.
So talk to your kids about the risks of vaping.
Because when you talk, they hear you.
Learn more at underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to civic media coverage of Cap Times Idea Fest. I'm Pat Kreitlow, founding editor of Up North News, host of Mornings with Pat Kreitlow, weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. on many of these civic media stations. Nice to have you along as we engage in a little intermission chatter ahead of the next portion of Idea Fest, one that a lot of folks, and I do mean folks, are waiting for, because that, of course, signifies Governor Tony Evers will be coming on just about 15 minutes from now or so, along with Dave Maraniss. The conversation with the governor will wrap up Wednesday's third day of activity, but there's still plenty more to come for Idea Fest. The 9th annual Thought Festival kicked off on Monday afternoon with a discussion of the effects of artificial intelligence, and it just rolled on from there with all kinds of speakers. If you've missed some of them already, I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunity to read about them in the Cap Times and elsewhere. There was a good discussion on Trump and gerrymandering and the rule of law, a one-on-one with Maureen Dowd, ways to keep Dane County's lakes clean, high-quality apprenticeships, addressing workforce needs in Wisconsin and beyond. There's a Wisconsin sportscast there with Tony Granato. There was Norm Eisen and Jennifer Rubin with a panel called The Contrarians. And there was a one-on-one with Stacey Abrams that we'll talk about more in just a bit. And then, of course, earlier today, the schedule called for helping you navigate your health care and also breakthroughs to cures on immunotherapy, all leading up to the conversation you just heard, Doomsday Scenarios, a conversation with Garrett Graff, which was a very fascinating conversation. You understand why his blog is called Doomsday Scenario. The former editor of Politico Magazine and Washingtonian magazine keeps a pretty strict account of the Trump administration's attacks on democracy all these years. In his most recent post entitled America Tips into Fascism, he writes, "I think many Americans wrongly believe that there would be one clear, unambiguous moment when we go from democracy to authoritarianism. Instead, this is exactly how it happens. What we're seeing right now, a blurring here, a norm destroyed there, a presidential dictate unchallenged. And then you wake up one morning and our country is suddenly different." A lot of good points that he made. He talked about how federal law enforcement, by and large, is being brought to a stop. We're talking counterintelligence, we're talking cybercrime, espionage, domestic terrorism, human smuggling, white-collar crime, a halt to hiring new law enforcement officers in all these agencies, all in service to an agency called ICE that is undergoing explosive growth, all to enact a mass deportation strategy, making it much more of a priority to seize Maria in housekeeping than literal drug cartels or Wall Street Ponzi schemes. Or as Graff put it tonight, it's an amazing time to be a criminal in the United States. And Dave Maraniss returned with, or the White House. Graff said, this administration is torching the moral legitimacy of what law enforcement has built up in America. All right, what we'll do now is look at or I should say listen to, because again, it's still radio. Let's listen to some of what Stacey Abrams had to say. And she was talking to Maggie Dawn. Stacey Abrams is a Democratic political strategist, a former Georgia legislator. She twice ran for governor in Georgia. She's a tireless voting rights advocate. Abrams founded the Fair Fight organization. She's also written 17 books. As Cap Times writer Becky Jacobs put it in her story, mere minutes after appearing on stage Tuesday, Stacey Abrams quickly dissected the differences between a democracy and authoritarianism and outlined what she views as the 10 steps to autocracy. She talked about it Tuesday on the Maggie Dawn Show. Here is a 7-minute clip from that conversation.
We've got Leader Stacey Abrams with us this afternoon to close out this show. We're so glad that you are all with us. Right before the break, we were talking about in these 10 steps to autocracy and authoritarianism, step 3 is weaken competing powers. This has been part of the Republican playbook when it comes to voting access and voting rights for 30 years. It has sort of reached fever pitch at this moment. and you have one of your passions, if I can say, has been voting rights and access to the voting booth. What should all people, regardless of party preference, be concerned about the particular ways that the MAGA regime has been eroding both trust and faith in election processes, but almost as importantly, if not more importantly, access, the actual franchise, the access to the voting booth and the right to vote itself?
So step 3, you weaken competing powers. And step 10, you try to ensure that there are no future elections of import. So we have to remember that Russia has an election every few years, but we always know who's going to win. So they don't eliminate voting, they eliminate the power of the vote. And Republicans have been assiduously attacking the power of the vote for the last 30 years. Wisconsin was ground zero. When Wisconsin passed its voter ID law in 2014, you all faced a Supreme Court case where a Black woman was denied the right to vote because her ID did not come with an original birth certificate, but because she was born during the Jim Crow era, she was denied a compliant birth certificate. So when we hear the language of, oh, voter ID, no one disagrees that you should have ID. Everyone aggressively believes that you should have ID. The question is, what type of ID? What are the requirements for that ID? That's what's been weaponized. You talked about the specter of voter fraud, which is a complete and utter myth. There is no voter fraud. It is more likely that you will be struck by lightning, because fraud means intent to pretend to do. I mean, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but put it this way. You are more likely to get struck by lightning than someone is to commit voter fraud in this country. We have an issue with voter participation, not voter fraud. But the larger narrative that we have to understand is that they do not want people to participate in elections. And if they do, they want to make it so difficult that it seems nearly impossible for it to matter. And the way I talk about voter suppression is, can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast a ballot? And does that ballot get counted? But what they're also the machinery they are also manipulating is what we're watching happen in Texas and now in Missouri. Right. What they are trying to do in other states, which is they're trying to redraw the lines in the middle of the process so that they can't lose anymore. That's the voter manipulation that we need to watch. But we also have to recognize they're also trying to defund election security. They're trying to blackmail local governments. And so our responsibility is to demand access, not just to the ballot, but to the power of the vote. That when we vote for someone, that person should be the person who's actually elected to hold power.
Not just the vote itself, but the power of the vote, the import of the vote, because it stands for how we hold government accountable. Without the power behind the vote, I understand why people have felt disengaged. Absolutely. When that system works, it makes you feel disengaged. And that is its primary objective. So you stay home and nothing matters anymore. I want to briefly pivot with the time that we've got left. One of the Donald Trump sort of brand indicators is that he specifically targets individuals by name. He loves the nicknames. We can call him Little Hand Don, the Orange King, right? All of it. But he loves to give everybody nicknames, and he loves to attack individuals and to bring the power of the MAGA regime mob down on individuals. And in fact, in his pseudo State of the Union address after being sworn into office this very year, he name-checked Leader Abrams. Let's take a listen.
$1.9 billion to recently created Decarbonization of Homes Committee, headed up, and we know she's involved. Just at the last moment, the money was passed over by a woman named Stacey Abrams. Have you ever heard of her?
I'll just say this, Leader Abrams, when the entire Republican caucus of the U.S. Congress boos, that is a huge personal accomplishment. So I'll say congratulations to you. But this targeting of individuals, whether it's Mark Elias, the law firm he used to work for, going after Judge Dugan with a criminal prosecution, the selective prosecution of an LGBTQIA Lambda lawyer in Alabama. This individual intimidation is designed for a broader purpose. What is it?
So this is a combination of step 7 and step 8. So you scapegoat the marginalized, you scapegoat communities of color, you scapegoat women, you scapegoat the LGBTQIA plus community. You go after communities using DEI, which is why you watch this president and this administration and this party attack diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they are terrified that it actually works. And then you connect that to step 8, which is the civil society that protects all of us, the lawyers who fight for us, the universities who teach us, the philanthropies that invest in us, the protesters who speak up for us. But here's the thing. If you are the average white guy in Wisconsin who's trying to figure out, why does DEI matter to you? I would point out that the very first act of DEI in this country was the Revolutionary War, when we decided that you didn't have to be a land-holding man, white man in this country to have purpose and meaning and a vote. We fought an entire war to guarantee that white men of every economic class could participate fully in this country. And from that, we grew the rest of DEI. And it has taken us 250 years, but it is in our DNA that diversity, equity, and inclusion be who we are, because it started with making sure that white men of every stripe had access to what they needed, and the rest of us simply want to be a part of it as well. This is not about taking from one to give to the other. It is about expanding access to opportunity, because we all deserve access to the American dream. And if we believe in DEI, then we are patriots. And if we don't, then we are denying who we are as a nation, and we are on the wrong track.
Because all of us deserve the opportunity to be successful in this country.
That is Stacey Abrams on the Maggie Dawn Show yesterday. Now, coming up, you're going to hear Dave Maraniss interview Tony Evers. The interesting part here is that Dave Maraniss has deep Madison roots, according to Paul Fanlin. He's interviewed over 40 prominent figures at Cap Times Idea Fest since it began in 2017, but apparently Maraniss has never met Tony Evers. Going to be a very interesting conversation coming up from Cap Times Idea Fest. I'm Pat Kreitlow. Catch me 6 a.m. tomorrow across the Civic Media Radio Network. The conversation with Governor Tony Evers is coming up next.
Nightlight with Pete Schwaba.
Why is cookie dough in everything now? It was fun when you were a kid and actually ate the cookie dough, but in ice cream, it's just it's like an interruption for the gorgeous texture that is cold cream ice cream. And then, and here's this uncooked egg and whatever it is. There's a fudge ribbon swirl, awesome. Vanilla ice cream, great. Peanut butter cups, great. Nuts, awesome. Cookie dough, barf.
Nightlight with Pete Schwaba. Weeknights from 6 till 8 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the Civic Media app. The Maggie Dawn Show.
Indy Dadagupta, he is with the Center for Law and Social Policy.
The Trump administration's agenda is reducing economic growth. The programs that they're proposing cutting, like Medicaid and SNAP, especially for kids, actually more than pay for themselves. So we are really looking at a tough long-term economic outlook entirely created by the current policymakers.
The award-winning Maggie Dawn Show at its new time, weekdays 4 till 6 p.m. The Todd Albaugh Show.
Mr. Pat Kreitlow joins us from Lake Wissota. Everything that I know about high culture, everything I know about opera, for example, comes from Bugs Bunny cartoons. The kids are missing out these days. They got Bluey and all of that.
Well, now it's all like real.
We had coyotes falling off of cliffs. Come on.
Exactly. And now it's all this educational crap.
We really have just become the two old men rocking on the porch talking about days gone by.
The Todd Albaugh Show. Weekdays 2 to 4 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app.
This is Robert Pilot of Native Roots Radio. On our show, we share stories from Turtle Island, highlighting the people and issues shaping our communities. From protecting water to treaty rights and preserving languages and traditions, we cover it all. Hear voices like Arvina Martin of Emerge, Wisconsin, Dr. Stately, Robert Lilligren, and more. Because Native issues are human issues, and human issues are Native issues.
Native Roots Radio, weeknights at 8 on your local Civic Media radio station.
You are listening to the Civic Media coverage of the Cap Times Idea Fest 2025. We go now back to Memorial Union, where they're preparing for Tony Evers, our governor, to speak on his decision not to run next year for governor.
Hello again, everybody. Well, I think the next hour is going to be absolutely a fascinating conversation, and I'm glad you're here. I've been excited about this one. Welcome again to our 9th annual Cap Times Idea Fest. I do want to take a moment to thank our sponsors who make this possible, in addition to all of you for participating with your ticket purchases. And our big three sponsors this year are Epic, Exact Sciences, and UW Health, the Carbone Cancer Center. Please, give them a hand. I really thought that the Carbone's session that preceded Garrett Graff was wonderful, and I appreciate so many of you for being here. It was terrific. Thanks to our other sponsors, Madison Gas and Electric, the Ascendium Education Group, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, the University Research Park, the Century House, Penzi Spices, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Forward Theater Company, Leopold's Books, Bar, Cafe, and Madison College. Thank you. That'd be great if you could give them a hand. I appreciate it. Our partners here are Hinckley Productions, Civic Media, Wisconsin Public Radio, Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com. Appreciate David Maraniss, who's doing double duty tonight. He's the moderator on back-to-back sessions, so thank you, David. It is indeed my honor to welcome Wisconsin's 46th governor to our stage tonight. Tony Evers has spent 50 years in public service as an educator and as our governor. Those of you who follow my columns might know I've interviewed the governor many times, beginning in 2018 with his first gubernatorial campaign. And I've written many times how I think he has been underestimated, that he is one of the most authentic and humble leaders I've encountered in 45 years of writing about politics in the state. Most important, Governor Evers has served as a bulwark against an extremist Republican legislature that is not there because of had been there because of their popular policies, but because of some of the most absurd gerrymandering in the country, which you've heard about all week. And so that's so gratifying. When the governor announced he would not run for a third term, the New York Times quoted a former Democratic chairman, Ben Wickler, Times, because Tony Evers was governor, Wisconsin is a freer, fairer, and more just place in a way that will touch the life of every Wisconsin kid. I've also always appreciated the governor's droll sense of humor. In 2019, the first time I sat down with him in his spacious and ornate office in the Capitol's East Wing, I commented that the last time we talked was across the street in his cramped campaign office storage room surrounded by a mountain of boxes. He said, "Paul," he told me, "if it would make you more comfortable, we can bring in some boxes." Please welcome Governor Evers and David Maraniss.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I have to open my Mountain Dew here.
Diet Mountain Dew. He asked if it was okay if you brought it out on stage.
It's bad for you. Sorry.
Governor Evers, it's a pleasure for me to meet you tonight for the first time ever. I'm sure that hundreds of folks in the audience have gotten to know you better than I, although I follow you from afar with great interest in rooting for you. And I also discovered tonight that Probably the best thing that Governor Evers and I have in common is that we married our high school sweethearts, and we're both still married.
Yes, how about that? 53 years.
Yep. So you've been standing up to regressive and repressive Republicans for quite a while. I thought that maybe you should get Reggie White's old title as Minister of Defense.
I know. He's got a few pounds and a few more inches than I do, so I am who I am.
But I thought, I mean, you've had many great moments, but in my opinion, your finest hour was months ago when you stood up to Tom Homan with your "I am not afraid" speech about them threatening to arrest you. Can you take us through how you found out about it, how you decided to give that speech, and the whole ambiance of that day?
Yeah, I actually thought, if I remember correctly, I just saw him talk about me on TV, CNN, MSNBC, and I thought, well, you jackass. Who do you think you are, saying that they were going to arrest me, or whatever it was? It was just ridiculous, and it's that kind of personal politics that makes people sick of politics. It's when it's personal, especially. It's one thing to say, I disagree with you. It's another thing to say, I'm going to throw you in jail. I mean, there's a difference there. Yep. And that sort of approach, and I've seen him on TV subsequent to that, and it's pretty much, that's who he is. And that's somebody that the president obviously has great love for, and so that's the way the administration is operating. That said, yeah, have at it. Throw a 73-year-old man into prison. See if it's going to make any difference.
And why did you decide to give the speech for the whole state to hear?
Yeah, I think it was the next day or the day after. Yeah. I mean, we thought about it, and we thought, yeah, I have to respond, especially when somebody's kind of threatening you in that fashion. And it's not that I really thought that he would start shaking in his boots, thinking, God, I got to stop doing that. But at least it calls out bad behavior, and so at minimum we did that.
And it's standing up to a bully, which usually they don't know how to react to that when somebody does stand up to them. But that was back in May, and it's only gotten worse since then in so many ways. Yeah. And at that point, as I remember it, he was saying that they would throw you in jail because you wanted to just do legal things to let state agencies know how they should respond.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you took it to today and they went into Milwaukee, what would you do?
Well, I'd do everything I could to stop them. I mean, there are probably things that I don't have authority to do, but at the end of the day, the issue of the National Guard is an issue that is a no-brainer. I'm head of the National Guard in Wisconsin. Great group of men and women that train. They go across the world to support our troops elsewhere, but they're not trained as police officers. And so you see what they're doing in Washington, D.C. It's all, taking care of the lawn and putting mulch out here and there, and wearing a uniform. I guess that is some way to scare the living daylights out of people. But the National Guard are not police officers, and so that's we would do everything we can to stop that from happening.
Everything they can is a little general. Do you have specific plans that you weren't talking about?
I'm not going to be able to address that at this time.
But you do have have a
Yes.
plan. Yes. Okay. Whoa.
Is that,
We'll let somebody answer it.
Is that Holloman or whatever?
They're coming after you right now.
Is he here? I doubt it.
I compared you to Reggie White, but it's more apt to compare you perhaps to Presidents Clinton and Biden and Obama, who had to play defense, especially in the final years of their terms, where you've had to do it pretty much the whole time. Yeah. And we'll get to this later, but it's kind of ironic that you've survived that brilliantly over 2 terms, and then some future Democratic governor might not have to do that again, right?
Yes.
If gerrymandering is changed.
It's my gift. It's my gift to the world. No, but what it did, I mean, it wasn't exactly a landslide win the first time around or the second time around, but the first time it was just a little over 1%. But I was a Democrat and I won the seat, and the legislature was almost completely red, certainly of politics. And frankly, I think it showed Wisconsin that there's something wrong with the maps here in the state. We talked about it a lot for years. I'm sure most of the people out here have talked about it a lot. And I'm not saying this is a great Tony thing, but the fact of the matter is that I won, beat an incumbent, pretty powerful incumbent that had done lots of important things, most of them negative, and I won that race. And the legislature made no difference because it was all red. And I think that put us in a much better place to change maps subsequent to that. And that was a huge deal for us in the state of Wisconsin, huge.
Yes. It put everything in a better place except for you as governor, in a sense.
Yeah, but
so did you develop a strategy of how to deal with this Republican legislature over the 2 terms?
Over 2 terms, yes, because they understood after we had fair maps that we have to work with this guy, and we have to, if we want to accomplish some things, we have to maybe compromise. That's their point of view. And we did that with the last budget and a lot of other things. But the one thing that was good is that the governor has some pretty powerful ways to we can veto all sorts of things, and we did, and we were able to, because of the Senate, we were able to make sure that, or the Senate or the Assembly, that they didn't have any supermajority, and that was critical. So. Horrible things, we stopped. Simple, there's a whole bunch of them, but a horrible bunch of them. Yeah.
What would you say was the most important thing that you stopped that really changed this?
Well, they wanted to change the maps to make it even worse, and that would put us out for another 100 years. And so there's just no way. So we vetoed several bills that had to do with that.
Well, let's go back to the end, your decision not to run for a 3rd term. I've done some reporting on this. I know there were several factors, but the one that struck me, because I'm a writer, would place you out in the middle of Lake Mendota on a pedal boat with your wife, alone, thinking about that.
Yeah.
And how did that influence your decision? Or
of course, it was hard. I love this job. A lot of people in this room, I hope at least 51% of the people in this room voted for me. And
I would say a lot more than that.
But, just kidding. And I love the job. And I can say this with all honesty. I learn something new every day. And that's important to me in a whole bunch of ways, but I think it makes me a better governor. And in addition, I had a chance to kind of set my days and how I operate. And I made it very clear right from the beginning that if I was going to represent the people of Wisconsin, I needed to be in Wisconsin, and instead of being in the capital a lot, I would say out of a 5-day week or 6-day week or 7-day week, I was out of the capital 4 or 5 days. And that makes a whole difference. You know, visiting schools, visiting businesses, visiting nonprofits, you name it, going into small towns and going to every single small town or every single main street business in the various places in the state. I learned something every time I'd done that. And that's what made me, I think, made me successful as a governor. I don't talk about myself in those ways too often, but I guess I can now that I'm leaving the office. But that was really important to me, and I forgot your original question. I went too far.
Well, it wasn't about that, but it was about deciding not to run.
Yes.
And I really want you to be out on Lake Mendota on that pedal boat making the decision.
So those are all the good things. And I could have said, yeah, I can do this another year or another 4 years. But when it came down to it, it was about kids and grandkids and Kathy. And we were several times out in the middle of the lake talking about this. And, you know, now when we go out in the middle of the lake, we think, oh my God, we gotta buy a house. We gotta buy 2 cars. What are we going to do with all these clothes that I'm no longer going to need? So the conversations have changed a bit, but it was all about kids, grandkids. I have 9 grandkids. We have 3 children, and God knows how many we're going to have great grandchildren down the road. And 50 years in state service or local government service, it was time. And so it was a really hard decision to make, and but no regrets.
Was that going out 4 or 5 times a week, being around people around you all the time, is that a double-edged sword? Did you also want more privacy than you were allotted as governor, or did you thrive off that?
No, it was great. I have met so many people, made so many friends, and you know, I spent a lot of time up north, and northern Wisconsin is a pretty red area. But when it comes down to it, those merchants on a 5,000 city population, those people that are doing the good work, whether it's on a farm, whether it's in small towns, they see me as a good person, as somebody that's actually helping them.
Yeah. You're 73 years old. Age can be a factor in politics. I'm not accusing you in any way of slipping, except for one thing, which I might have to take back after I say it, but that was your performance announcing the vote at the Democratic Convention.
We don't want to talk about that.
You got me going here.
You know,
what happened there?
Well, it was the damnedest thing. I had it all. Somebody gave me a script that I didn't particularly like, and so I was trying to do things on the fly, and that obviously didn't work. But I also the person, I can't think of his name now, that was on the other side that was asking me the questions is from Wisconsin, and I wanted to talk to him directly. So I was trying to talk to him when I was talking to thousands of people.
Millions of people.
Yeah, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. But it was a great convention. Obviously, that was a kind of a major screw up, but I got over it, and I think most people did too. But the end of the day, it was a great convention. We had a good candidate, and unfortunately, she didn't win. That was sad.
Well, my only thought when I was watching you on television is, why isn't he wearing a cheese head? Ben Winkler had one on. Did you decide that wouldn't be appropriate?
I have a bigger head.
Oh, come on.
No kidding. I was going to say something else. No kidding. There wasn't a cheese hat there.
That fits your head?
That would fit my head.
You have a bigger head than Ben Wickler.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I tried on a couple. I said, these don't fit, and it's going to fall off. That would have made things worse. I mean, could you imagine having a cheese fall off, forgetting your lines, and say, okay, 55-1 or whatever it was. Yeah.
When Bill Clinton screwed up at a convention, he went and played the saxophone afterwards to make up for it.
Yeah.
You didn't have to do that, though.
Yeah, I never played the saxophone, and I played cornet in junior high school, and when I went to the high school, the music teacher said, "Don't play anything anymore." So I never had the opportunity to be in a marching band.
I presume, I think safely, that you're not going to endorse in the gubernatorial primary.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm curious about sort of the role of governor and lieutenant governor, to the extent you can talk about it. I know that historically sometimes those two politicians are not even that close. What was your relationship like with Sarah Rodriguez, and what did you make of her?
Yeah, Sarah's. Well, she they run separately in the primaries, and she had a really strong opponent, and she won quite handily. And so I was really impressed with that. You know, it wasn't. It's always interesting because you don't select the person that's lieutenant governor.
In many states you do. But
yeah, right. And but she ran a good race, and obviously she's a really smart person, and does a great job around the issues of health and so on. And the working relationship is no different. Mandela Barnes was with me for a couple of years, and he did a good job also. But it's really two. I mean, it's two separate. They pinch hit for me when I can't make things, but at the end of the day, we let them. We both Mandela and Sarah pretty much can do what they want to do that they feel is important. They're big adults; they can handle that.
So, and pardon my ignorance on this, but how would you compare it with a president and a vice president? In other words, you don't really instruct the lieutenant governor on what assignments you'd like them to carry.
Yeah, they pinch hit occasionally, but I don't want to make this sound wrong, but it's not a tightly run machine there, and looking back on other governors, it's never been it's never much different in Wisconsin. It's two people that were selected separately and then put together. I got along with both. They both had strengths and tried to build on those strengths.
One of your last acts was maybe your coolest, which is adding the 400-year language into the education funding bill.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you think of it? And will it have any impact beyond being symbolic?
Well, 400 years, that's a long time. It is significant, and it'll take some doing for that to change. I mean, there'd have to be a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, and probably could change that law. But the good news is we have some really good people. I want to say that I worked real hard. I looked at every line in a budget bill that big. We have people that actually that is their job, is to see where we can use our veto, and that's one of the things that they came up with, and it was a damn good one.
So again, excuse my ignorance on this part of the state government, but that language was added into a veto as opposed to just the budget itself?
Correct.
And
we crossed off things off.
Line veto.
Lines and numbers and things like that, and voila.
And someone said, let's add 400 years to this thing, and you
said, there were some numbers in there. I can't remember
24 something.
Yeah, 2040 to whatever, and you cross out a few things, and voila, you got 400.
So if that was one of the happiest moments, pulling that one off, what was your darkest moment as governor, would you say?
Oh, there haven't been many, to be honest. I think the most important thing we've done is develop fair maps. Now we have to spend some time making sure that we have a process, an independent process, to do it again when we do this at the end of the decade. And I think we will. I think we can get that done. There were no times that I felt morose about anything. There were things that like this last time around. I'm an educator. I make sure that we do the best we can for our K through 12 system and our K through and our higher education folks, and we just couldn't move the needle as far as we needed. We made some huge progress, but not enough. And so things like that are not the greatest outcomes. But at the end of the day, there wasn't anything significant. I mean, obviously during the pandemic, we did some things that you hated to influence and make people maybe do some things that they didn't want to do, like stay at home, wear a mask, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, those are the right things to do. It just, we knew that we were making some people angry, and they weren't going to participate in making sure everybody stayed healthy. But at the end of the day, I don't have any moment that I thought this job really sucks or anything like that. So
you're listening to WAUK Jackson, Milwaukee, WMDX Columbus, Madison, WCFW HD2 W228 EP Chippewa Falls, WFHR Wisconsin Rapids, WISS Oshkosh, WZBU New Holstein, WLAK Amory, WLCX La Crosse, WRCE Richland Center, and WBZH Hayward, a part of the Civic Media Radio Network.
The answer is yes and no. We have a group of Republicans in the legislature that are as strongly right-wing as anybody that's in Washington, D.C. We've got Congress people from Wisconsin that fall into that category. But the good news is, and I don't want to overstate this, but when we developed the fair maps, we knew that we had opportunities to change that behavior a little bit, and we did. We had a budget that was passed. I know there were some things that we didn't get, but we did get quite a few things that I think are very helpful for our state, including in education and including, whether our infrastructure is strong, a number of things like that we did get. And we compromised on some things. And when we compromised, they got some things. Frankly, we got some things that we would never have gotten. And so this system works. It doesn't work perfectly, but I feel much better today than I did when it was things were difficult in the legislature.
Speaking of fair maps, another theme that's come out in the last few days at the Idea Fest has to deal with how you respond to Republican unfairness in terms of gerrymandering.
Oh my God.
And first of all, do you know Governor Newsom? I mean, I'm sure you've met him. And what do you think about what he's trying to do out there and your response?
I mean, I hate to sound like I haven't decided, but I spent a good part of my life saying fair maps are really important. We have to get it. We have to make sure that we get this in Wisconsin. We're successful. And, we are a purple state, whether we like purpleness as a color. It is what it is. And I don't see any race for governor to be somebody's going to win by 5% or 10%. That's just not going to happen. But what was the question again?
This is not the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah, I know. But I was headed down the road.
No, it's about what Governor Newsom is doing out in California.
Yes. And it's the problem is I find it disgusting that Trump calls up the people in Texas and says, "Hey, I need 5 more seats." And then we're put in the Democratic governors are put in the position of doing something equally horrible, frankly. There should be a process that people follow, not like when the president says jump, you jump. And then, so I'm glad I'm not in that position that Newsom is, that he can do it. He's got a whole bunch of Democrats there, percentage-wise. And but what happens then is that the people in Iowa do it, or someplace else that's red does it.
Missouri.
Yeah, and so what have we gained? We've essentially decided that the process of setting maps is not a thing that is holy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's a thing that is frankly disgusting. So I hate to say this, but the president started it. I suppose we have to respond to it. We could not respond to it even if we wanted to. So it frustrates me. I see it and I get a little ticked off about it. But I guess if that's the way they have to play the game, we have to respond.
I know all politicians dislike hypothetical questions.
Yes.
But if you had control of the legislature here and you could change a couple of congressional seats to make a difference,
no,
you wouldn't do it.
No, I couldn't. I spent my whole damn life talking about fair maps, and to say, oh, I'm for fair maps. I want an independent group that develops those fair maps, except that when I want to get back at somebody, that'd be hard for me to do. That would be very, very hard for me to do. And so the answer is I couldn't do it.
That's a very honorable position, and one that most of the other guests here have taken the other side on.
Of course, I get it, but they're not in a position that for the last 20 years, this is we need an independent group of people making the maps, and Wisconsin is above board. I hate to say that, but we are.
Yeah, well, that's the tradition here.
Yes.
I'd like to ask some more personal questions for a while.
I already told you I'm 73.
When you were a kid, scraping the mold off cheese in Plymouth, Wisconsin, did you ever think did you grow up like Clinton and Obama, thinking you'd be president or governor someday?
God, no. Absolutely.
What were your dreams then?
To marry my wife. I met her in kindergarten.
Whoa, you got me beat there.
Yeah. So that's where my focus was most of the time. No, I have to go and talk about my folks first. And my father was a physician. However, he was the doctor in a tuberculosis sanatorium in Sheboygan County, and he was from Illinois originally, and he came up and married my mother, and she was a nurse, she was a doctor, and ran this sanatorium, and we lived right on the grounds of that sanatorium. They had a house there, and he walked to work, and that's the way every county had some sort of tuberculosis sanatorium.
Was that a happy place to be?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was good. People got better. Tuberculosis. But the thing that I learned from him, and it paid dividends in my head at least, is that Kohler Company is right there near, it's in Sheboygan County. And Kohler Company back in the days, the workers there got lots of silicosis because of the sand in the air when they're making toilets and bathtubs and things like that. So he spent a lot of time on making sure that those workers got the what they should get from the state when somebody gets ill at work. And he spent a lot of his time there, and the AFL-CIO folks have always stood behind him. And I learned that. You had to, if you want to be successful, you have to consider the people that are actually doing the work and making sure that they're healthy. And so that was a good learning experience. And so I never thought of being governor at all. I never thought I'd be a politician at all. But my parents were both active politically. They would, my mother would invite people over from the university to have dinner with us, and of course they were all liberals, and so I kind of came from that background.
Which university?
Oh, just the local, the two-year campus
Okay.
at Sheboygan, actually, University of Wisconsin, Sheboygan. And so that's the way I grew up, and it was just a regular. I did scrape mold off of cheese, and I was amazed when I became governor, because I visited lots of cheese factories, that cheese no longer has mold on it anymore. So that job would have been eliminated if I decided to do that. So I'm glad I found a different route to success.
Well, let's talk cheese. Why doesn't it have mold anymore?
I have no idea. I've asked that question a whole bunch of people, and they say, I don't know. And so I'm guessing it's the way they make it, because I can remember.
I think I've got mold on some of my cheese in the fridge right now.
You should eat it before it gets moldy. And I eat a lot of cheese. It's just amazing. But I never liked it until I worked in a cheese factory. And I'd be on the line there, and 40 pounds of cheese, if it was very old cheese, it would have at least half an inch of mold on it. You'd scrape it off, throw it on the floor, scrape it off, throw it on the floor.
What do you use to scrape it?
It's a cheese scraper.
Cheese scraper.
That's what they called it. I can remember that. But it was great. Like I said, I met my wife in kindergarten, and we went to school together, and we still hang out. We go to every 5 years we go to a class reunion. The numbers get smaller, folks, every time you go, but it's all good. It's fun. Kathy's on the Zoom with a group of her friends from high school. I think once a week they do that.
Yeah, that's fabulous.
Yeah, it's good. It's cool. It's Wisconsin.
How big was Plymouth High School?
I don't know, 400 kids maybe.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's relatively small. Not big back then, but yeah.
And when did you decide you wanted to be a teacher?
Oh, that was after going to college. I actually was hoping to follow my father and be a doctor. That didn't quite work out.
Because you didn't like.
Well, I had a
physics
3.75
chemistry?
from UW, and that was too low back then. It was really competitive back then. So Kathy and I went. So long, people are going to wonder when I'm going to shut up. But
keep going.
I got to tell you a story.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go to medical school. It didn't work out, and so Kathy and I were married then. We lived out in Middleton, and I got home from school one day, and she said, "What is this?" And I was approved to attend the medical school in Graz, Austria. And I thought, what in the hell is going on here? And I had forgotten I applied. And so we decided, let's do this. And we went to Graz, Austria for a year, and didn't plan out. I knew no German before I left. And so we could communicate well on daily stuff, but learning something as complex as that in German was difficult. So after a year, we left, and I decided I want to be a teacher. So that's what I did.
And what did you want to teach?
Biology.
Biology.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was great. And then after that,
What kind of teacher were you?
I was a good teacher, I thought. Yeah, but I liked to follow to some extent the interests of kids, sophomore kids especially, and so we did as much as we could outside of the classroom as inside the classroom, because you can learn things about science by looking at, in close terms, the lawn in front of the high school. And so there's all sorts of things that happen there that are really important and thoughtful, and so we'd spend a lot of time outside the classroom. So like that, became an elementary principal. And
we're going to stay right there for a minute, okay? I wrote a biography of Vince Lombardi, and he was a teacher before he became a football coach.
Yes.
And what he learned as a teacher was how to convey information so that every student understood it, from the one that would have the most struggle with it to the smartest kid in the class. And that helped him learn how to deal with people, basically. So did you learn things from teaching that you think you carried with you?
No question, no question. But anything I did in the education sphere prepared me for this, whether I was an elementary principal, high school principal, whatever, and superintendent.
And why did you want to get into administration as opposed to taking away from the kids?
Yeah, it was kind of weird. I was also the one that I was a union guy, and I was, which was a great learning experience. But the superintendent where I was at thought, this guy'd be a better administrator than a union leader, and so he
You
decided,
mean get him inside the tent instead of outside?
I guess so. Anyway, so I moved from that piece to becoming an administrator, and it's fun. One of my best jobs was being high school principal. I learned so much there from kids. Every noon hour, I'd go out to Smoker's Corner because we left kids out there smoking, and I found out so much. Either that or they lied to me a lot. But
would they stop smoking when you came around?
Oh no.
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 Oh, good for them. Yeah.
No. It was Smoker's Corner.
Did you smoke?
Not with them. I did
Just
smoke.
in the teacher's lounge where it was all smoke
Oh
all
my
the
God,
time.
it was horrible. Yeah. I'm glad I stopped. It was the best thing I did. Anyway, but it was fun. I learned something new every day there. It's been a blast.
So, why did you want to become superintendent of schools in the state? And you ran 3 times, is that right?
3 times, yep, 3 times.
Yeah.
I knew that if I remained at the local level, I would never be able to advocate for kids. Even I know I could advocate even better for kids at the state level. Have had success, and I love being state superintendent. And I was able to make some changes that I think were helpful, and I really advocated for the teacher unions, always have, always will, and so that's obviously an important thing in the state of Wisconsin. So it was a good run. It's just that at a point I realized that if I could even have a better direction to make an impact on kids' lives, I should become governor of the state. That's why I did it.
Going back slightly, you ran and lost twice before you won the superintendent's job, is that right?
Yes.
And that's, I'm always interested in how people overcome failure. I mean, I don't consider that necessarily failure, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Was it hard for you to say, well, I'm going to do it again the second time or the third time, or you just?
I knew I could win. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I was not going to, I mean, I suppose at some point in time, if I'm running when I'm 73 for the first time, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
But no, I always felt I could win, and it was difficult because the first couple times it was just, I didn't know what I was doing, frankly. And I ran and didn't have the support, the internal support. When I did finally win a race for state superintendent, I had my stuff together and had good background and had good people working with me and all that. And that made a huge difference.
And as someone who devoted your life to education, Act 10 must have been a real crisis, a point where you decided, or how did that affect you? I guess
it was horrible. It was. You don't take rights away like that and just assume that it's going to work out, because it doesn't, and it didn't. And so that was horrible. We're still, and the thing that I'll never forget, it was essentially a lie when the people that did this saying, well, we're saving all this money, and it was because the teachers were paying more for retirement, they were paying more for health care, they were paying more for all sorts of things that they never paid for before. So there was no additional money put into schools. It was taken out of the pockets of teachers. That was wrong, and it's still wrong. And so that was a motivating factor. We still have a long way to go. I think if we get the right kind of folks in the legislature, we will be able to make that change. There's no question.
The word hero is thrown around a lot for military personnel and sports figures, but the real heroes in the community are the teachers and the nurses, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. They impact lives every single day, and it's not that, the people that run small stores downtown, they obviously make an impact on the community and the environment and the economic health of a city. But at the end of the day, nurses and teachers are the backbone of our state and our country.
How much, along with the 400-year thing and everything you've tried to do, how do you feel about what you've been able to bring back from Act 10 to today?
Yeah, we're at a stalemate on Act 10. Whatever we can do to raise the stature of teachers and all that, that's important, but we need to allow people to be in a union if they choose to be that way. But I think we've made, and I'm not changing the subject here, but I think we've made some, and it was partly in my head too. Yes, I wanted to make sure kids had the best opportunities possible, but it became clearer and clearer to me when I was governor that there's a whole subset of things that need to be addressed if kids can be successful. Healthcare, transportation, housing, you name it. And all those things impact the lives of children. And if we want to be successful as a state, yes, we have to do right by our teachers. Yes, we have to have good things going on in schools. Yes, they need more money. Yes. But if they don't have good health care, if they don't have transportation systems, if they don't have affordable housing, you name it, all those things, because a teacher has that kid for 5 hours a day, primarily 3/4 of the year, sometimes more. All those other things are year-round. And unless we recognize that there has to be good things, as I mentioned before, and money flowing into making sure, affordable housing. Tomorrow I'm going to be, I think it's tomorrow, going to someplace in northern Wisconsin that sometime during the campaign or during the pandemic, they got some money, worked with a technical college, helped build housing for workers, affordable housing in northern Wisconsin. That's a win. That's a win for kids.
You taught biology, so I guess in the Scopes era it would be different, but you've got Oklahoma and Florida now mandating teaching of the Ten Commandments and a false history of the United States where slavery wasn't so bad. If you were a teacher in one of those states, what would you do?
Leave. I would leave. And just using this as an example, I mean, in Louisiana, you're putting the commandments on the wall. So what if your kid is going to that school and you're not involved with any religion, or you are a Muslim, or you are whatever? How is that moving the needle? That's not moving the needle. And that, I'm sorry, that bothers me a whole lot. And some of the things that I hear now, it's bothersome. We have to make sure that we keep our public schools public.
So how does that relate to school choice?
Pardon me?
What's your feeling about school choice in general or specific?
Yeah, it's just overall, I would have never supported it. But we've had it for, I think, almost 40 years here in Wisconsin. So I know it's not going to change anytime soon. And so my goal is to, make sure that the public schools get as much resources and help from the state as possible. But I also know that in the near future, there is going to be voucher schools in Wisconsin. I mean, once it is in place, I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Paul Fandon likes to talk about quintessential Wisconsinite figures. Yeah. From Gaylord Nelson and Herb Cole, and he says the most quintessential is Tony Evers.
Quintessential sounds like old.
But what is your image of Wisconsin? What does Wisconsin mean to you?
That's a great question. I think it's a great place to live, a great place to raise kids. It has people that are very, very conservative and people that are very, very liberal, and there's a whole bunch of people in the middle. I think Wisconsin is a very special place, and we have to protect it. We have to protect it. There's lots of things going on in Washington, D.C. that would impact the lives of all Wisconsinites. In fact, I don't even want to say the name of the bill, but you know what bill I'm talking about. How many people can name a bill without it being named? You know what I'm saying? It wasn't called the blah, 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 BBB or whatever the hell it is. It was some other name, but because the press talks about it in that terms, then that's what everybody else, I won't say the words. I'm sorry. But to put it bluntly, yeah. I think what's happening in Washington, D.C. is not quintessential Wisconsin. It is not. People in Wisconsin, I don't care if you're a small town, big town, or you're Republican, you're Democrat, you're very conservative, you're a liberal. You want to have good schools. You want to have good roads. You want to have, good housing, all those things people care about, and there's a lot of unanimity around those things in Wisconsin. If we can just get through the politics, and I think we are making some progress.
The other thing you want is a good governor or a great governor. So
yeah, for sure, you got to have one of those.
We've had one. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Civic Media's coverage of the Cap Times 2025 Idea Fest. I would like to thank Luke Mathers, Chris Casper, Dominic Lee, Parker Olson, and Pat Kreitlow for making this broadcast possible. I'm Aaron Zommers, and we now return you to your regularly scheduled Civic Media programming.